Hello, everybody, and I just want to start off by saying trigger warning out there to anyone who is watching. Um, this video is going to be talking about a lot of serious issues that will involve talking about sexual assault, talking about sexual harassment, abuse, all of the above. And I just want you all to know that as much as I want this to be a safe space, I mean, it is an important episode to watch, but if you do feel triggered, I'm just like announcing it now. Don't watch it if you're uncomfortable with that. I just want to say thank you. And again, this is an important issue for me because it's something that's really personal for me. And I just feel like after everything and seeing the responses of people, it's an important video to talk about and not necessarily focusing on, you know, the actual thing or like what leads to it, like how people should respond, like the most humane way. So that's what this video is about. I really hope that you learn something from this. I really hope that you enjoy it and that it's something to tell you that if you have gone through something like this, you are not alone. So yes, trigger warning. Again, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you to the guests.
Hello,
Hey,
everybody, and welcome to the Bubbly Project. Today, I know we're very, happy, but like the topic for today is the aftershocks of assault, and I have two guests here with me. I have a wonderful psychology teacher, one Miss Gopica Anand, and I have Johanna here, who is a teenager doing her last year of her IB diploma program. So, we also, obviously, this is a topic that is very pertinent to like today's world, today's society, and everything. So, one of the major things, so we're not really going to get into the nitty gritties of an assault or what causes an assault, but rather everything that happens right after. That's what we're going to be talking about. But someone who has gone through something like this, their whole um, perspective on life, their whole perspective on relationships, their whole perspective on all these things could change. So could you guys maybe give an insight on maybe how someone's mental health could change, and then we'll go on each other aspects of health.
so when we come to the victim and how you rightly said, the mental health is impacted, right? Now, it's just not that it affects them consciously, but there are a lot of effects that they are not aware of and that they discover in the later years of life. Because mostly what happens is when a sexual assault or abuse of any kind happens, we tend to repress it, and it takes a lot of ugly forms. So it could lead to unstable self-image, it could lead to self-harm, it could lead to having unstable relationships, trust issues, and all. I think PTSD is the most common of all. So yeah, that's about how it can affect the mental health. That those are the things that come on top of my mind right now.
Could you explain PTSD for our viewers who may not know what that is?
Yeah, so PTSD stands for post traumatic stress disorder. And any kind of trauma, in this case we are talking about sexual abuse or assault, leads to a lot of manifestations that happen in an individual. So it could lead to not only reliving that experience, but also lead to having outward experiences like even nightmares or panic or anxiety, or let's say even it can even lead to speech disorders in some cases. So PTSD can have a very huge like PTSD can take a very huge form. It could be very specific to an individual. It need not be like everyone's having it in the similar way. So that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. My take on being sexually abused or assaulted is slightly more different. I mean, of course, there's the biological and psychological aspect to it, but I think it's also important to look at how society deals with it and how society treats one of the abused. So we not only repress it and not talk about it, we behave a certain way because of how society has dealt with that issue before. So if somebody does get abused and nobody says anything about it, we don't say anything either, because what's the point? We're not going to get any help. Other than that, I think it's also really important to keep in mind that
the help that people need, the help that abused people need, and the help that abusers need is just simply not there. There aren't enough frameworks set up, especially in this country, to, to provide that support, like going to therapy, having free healthcare. We don't have that, and that makes the situation 1,000 times worse.
There's a statement that I'd like to see what your opinions are. And a statement I'm sure you've heard plenty, which is they say that every woman in her life, at least once, has been either sexually assaulted or harassed. And I just want to see where you all are on that statement and whether that is factual or not.
I think that is pretty much factual, but I would also like to say that it's not just the women, even men. And the statistics show that they are even like they have a higher ratio. So I think what Johanna said, right, that we have to behave in a certain way, and more so the men of the society, they have to behave a certain way. And it is not that it only happens in India when it comes to abuse.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't talk about it here. And when it happens in other countries, I think they are very vocal about it. So we think that it's something that is dealt with, but the impact is almost always as detrimental as it could be. So it's just not the women, it's even men, and even like talking about girls and boys, right, in the teenage years or early childhood even. So it happens with almost everyone, yeah.
I would say that sexual abuse or harassment, it is extremely common, and most of the people I know, most of the women I know at least, all of them have been sexually harassed in some form or the other. The guys in my life, the men I know, nobody's really said anything, but then again, you can also look at how it's frowned upon, like if somebody rapes a man, it's just, if you didn't do it, then she'd have to do it, it works that way. And that's also extremely wrong. But there we have the issue of not having the right education systems in place, where it's not talked about in schools at the most grassroots level of them all. And yeah, I mean, everybody I know, at least the women, all of them have been sexually harassed or assaulted at least once in their entire lives. So yeah, I think it just goes to show how incapable the systems we have in place are right now of protecting us and working in our favor. And it just shows that this entire government and the curricula that's being taught in schools needs to change.
I think it's all, you were saying that it's shameful for, for men to come out and say that they have been sexually assaulted. I'm going to not really give the flip side of that, but another avenue about why people don't say it or maybe don't think about it. Because guys are bred to like think a certain way, unfortunately, to think differently. And some of the times there's this show called Glee. It was a very famous show, and on that show, one of the characters, a teenage boy, came out and said that he was molested at a very young age. And all the guys in the room were like, oh wow, that's like everyone's dream, like that's everyone's dream to be. And what's upsetting is the fact that that's actual conversations that if someone was to say that, maybe they don't do it intentionally to shove that person's pain down. It could be done as a tactic to make that person feel better, maybe. Or it is just the way that they think. So not just shame, but also they might think that I'm supposed to like this. Like this is what I'm supposed to enjoy what's happening right now. So that's like, I think that's like another. I'd like to dive a little bit into the physical health of victims as well, because people don't really talk about that as much. Although, mental health is something that isn't talked about enough generally. But the physical health of victims is something people usually tend to overlook. So what are some things that could happen to a victim if they're sexually assaulted?
We are only talking about the physical aspects.
Yeah, just the physical aspects.
Yeah, I think their response to certain stimulus also becomes slightly slower. So their fight or flight response is affected when it comes to physical manifestations of this. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think even that body image is a physical issue. Yeah. Because it leads to eating disorders, which is again physical. I mean, the whole point is mental health and physical health go hand in hand. So
Yeah.
I don't know how to say this, but the entire physical health concept gets affected because their mental health is in a way ruined for them. So they don't look forward to enjoying daily activities that much as a physically or mentally healthy person would.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the biological aspect of this is quite interesting. There's something called neuroplasticity that I learned about a while ago, and is basically how the brain adapts to learning or certain experiences. So, um, in neuroplasticity, the brain fundamentally changes its structure or its contents based on certain experiences. So, when somebody is abused or assaulted, there is no doubt that there is some change that happens within their brain cells,
Hmm.
within their brains entirely. And this change may result in, certain memories being tainted forever, certain experiences that you'll never be able to relive the
Yeah.
same way, and just certain emotions that are triggered at certain times because of this one experience. But other than that, other than your brain, I think that um, Gopika is right here as well, because you know it does take a toll on you physically, and physical health does result in an impact on um, your mental health, and then physical health. So I think, yeah, they go pretty hand in hand. And aside from eating disorders and body image, there is obviously the pain and the just the shock your body goes through after you go through assault, because it is a traumatic experience. And it's also just a huge amount of fear that you have, and that sometimes results in heart palpitations and hyperventilation. So you can definitely look at it that way as well.
Now, this is regarding what the victim remembers and basically stories, the story of what happened to them. Now, as you said, when something like that happens, your body goes into shock, your brain can even go into shock, and you can't really. So, because of that, is it possible for people? Obviously, the assault still happened, but what I think is disappointing that whenever someone tries to bring it up in a, like, let's say someone tries to bring it up in a court case, or even how assault cases are handled even online, like on Twitter and Instagram. When people try to bring it up, they always ask like all of these questions to the person, and they try to nitpick as much as they can. Now, is there a possibility that when someone is telling the story, they obvious? I actually I don't. I mean, I'm sure you agree, but I would like to you both to explain why. Rather, is there a possibility that they might not remember or they might not know the story in the actual way that it happened? Although something happened, but is there a possibility that the details of the story might not be the same as what actually happened?
Yeah, I think that's what happens in a concept which is um, studied in psychology, like eyewitness testimony. Like everyone sees something happening, but they only remember what they felt or
Yeah.
how they felt. So even with the victims of sexual abuse or harassment, they remember how they felt, like mostly feelings of violation and pain and trauma, but it's obviously not the same when they are asked to recollect it. And it depends from person to person. Like when, because I had an experience where someone was being interrogated, and the person who was interrogating was like, it was just a touch. So for that victim, that touch could mean anything. It could have a lot of impact, and that's how they remember it. But even giving the details sometimes isn't enough, and obviously remembering them is itself a hard task. It's a very difficult task.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um I think that a main reason that people have those lapses in memory is because when your body goes through shock, your brain kind of just covers up certain areas so that you don't have to go through it again. because that reliving of that experience is just so traumatic for you that you just can't handle it. So yeah, definitely your brain chooses to not remember certain things because of their importance, and that is also a very, very important problem, especially when you're giving eyewitness accounts and stuff like that, because you want to talk about it and you know it, but you can't express it because it's sort of been blacked out in your own
Yeah.
brain. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is kind of scary, and it is very, very common.
Is there a chance? Okay, so actually, we can talk a little bit more personally here. There have been instances in the past, and people situations that we know of, where people use that excuse to not like as Miss Gopica has said that you know it was just like the interrogator could be like it was just a touch. That people can use this factor that you don't fully know or like fully remember what happened to kind of discredit your story, because I know that it's happened to people so many times that people are just like, oh well, you lied about this, or you lied about this one like really small detail, or like was it like something as small as like was it 4 or 4:30 or something like that, and if you don't remember that, then obviously it didn't happen to you and stuff like that. So do you think people are able to disregard what happened to that person just because they don't know the details?
See, I just want to say something here. People do not want to accept it in the first place. So they'll find any loophole to discredit this piece of information because A, they don't know how to deal with it or how to reciprocate, and B, because they are not comfortable themselves. So even if there is a slight flaw which could be overlooked and the feeling could be given importance to, they would still choose to do the former because the latter is very discomforting for them. Yeah.
It can certainly be used against the abused. Um, I think it does. It is extremely well. First off, it's very, um, you know, it's it's not a nice thing to do. Definitely, you can't just say that this didn't happen because you just couldn't remember it. Um, and I mean, it is a very difficult topic to broach in itself. And I do agree, it is like people choose to believe the better version just to satisfy themselves.
Yes.
Um, so, I mean, I can see it happening, but I also don't know how that could be avoided. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of trust in the person who's interrogating you, or the person who's talking to you about this, to even open up to them. And
Yeah.
to open up to them, you have to trust that they will do right by you, that they will say and accept your experiences even though you may not remember them. They will back you up. So I think trust plays a very important role here. And it honestly just depends on the person and the person who's talking to you, because their morals themselves are what is going to dictate how it goes.
And basically the relationships with people. Now, if the now usually, unfortunately, I don't know if the statistics are right. You both are here to correct me, really. But it is true that a lot, on I would say most sexual assault cases usually happen by someone that the victim knows and has a close relationship with. And we all understand how that could happen, because there's terms like grooming and obviously trust. But after that, what are all of the, not really all, but what are some of the major situations that happen with relationships like that? What happens to relationships like that after something?
I think you have given the trigger warning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to get a little bit candid. So most of the times when a child is abused, it's by either a very close family member or a distant family member who keeps on visiting time and again.
Yeah.
And there are many factors that they look into. They look at the child's personality, they look at the child's relationship with the parent, and they look at how the child will respond. Either are they aggressive, are they assertive, or are they
Submissive.
very submissive, and they really get a good understanding of this, and it's very messed up because it's a child. So what happens to the relationships after that is how what I've seen is that the person continues to live scot free. Is that the right word?
Yeah. They get
They're
away
just
scot.
there. Yeah, they're just there. And even if you tell it to your family members, right, it's very difficult for them to address this with other family members and take a step. And that's the first case, because they are just there, and you have to um, change your behavior around them,
Yeah.
and that is something that you carry on, which leads to social anxiety or discomfort around people. It's something that you like carry forward to your adult life also. And even more so when such a thing happens and it's addressed with a relative, I think you are constantly under that eye, like what will happen to her next? What will happen to her next? Now what can happen? So it's not a win-win situation anyway. Anyway, you've lost when you were abused. So the relationship dynamic is really screwed up, because most of the family members firstly won't accept it, and even if they do, sometimes they end up doing nothing about it.
Because they don't want to ruin, things which
Yeah,
people.
whatever they don't
Yeah.
want to ruin, which is
Which is
yeah.
worse considering, but I mean, especially living here, we know how tradition kind of exceeds emotion a lot of the time. So
And the funny thing would be that even they might have experienced it.
yeah.
Even your closed ones might have experienced it, but then even they won't want to voice it out. Yeah.
So there are statistics about this. 94% of offenders are known to the victims of rape, which is a frightening number, honestly. But it just shows how much you don't know about a person's relationships. And yes, raping a person and being raped can completely destroy a lot of relationships in your life, be it relationships with a friend or relationships with a family member, just by by this one act. You could have trust issues for the rest of your life, you could have body image issues, you could have just your brain would just sometimes not be able to handle the shock, and your brain would just lapse into a huge depression,
Yeah.
and you'd need to be on medication for the rest of your life. But the thing is, lots of these things happen to thousands of people across our country, but nobody says anything, and that just makes the entire situation 1,000 times worse. So yes, raping somebody, especially if you know them, and that person's relationships with other people around them, they will be fundamentally changed. And if not, if that person, the person who has been raped or assaulted or harassed, if they don't get the right help, there are implications that will go far, far beyond broken relationships. They will go through, they would need to have to go through, a year of lots of therapy, and just get a lot of help, because especially if you know the person, especially if you've confided in the person, it just shows how much you don't know about them.
Yeah.
And that you will take upon yourself,
Yeah.
that it was your fault, for not predicting this, for not knowing this. And that's where the damage is.
Yeah, and to just add on to what Johanna said, I think as a child, you need to have that trust in your primary caregiver, right? So when you really confide in them and they don't do anything about it, you feel helpless and you feel very vulnerable. And those are the kind of feelings which you can not just shrug off. Even with years of therapy, it might just not happen.
Yeah.
So we, or the people who are the victims, need to find out creative ways of dealing with it. And as much as tough as it sounds, but that's the only solace, like that's the only way we can
Yeah.
redeem ourselves.
Yeah. I think it's also important to mention that sometimes with victims especially, even if their primary caregiver would do something about it, they don't say anything about it. And
Yeah.
that is, and it's not the, and I think something that we need to make clear is that it's not the victim's fault that they're not, that they don't say their what happened to them, because a lot of the times they're like, oh, it happened like a year ago, it happened a month ago, why didn't you say anything at that time? And it's
Yeah.
because there's so many things in the victims by themselves, even if they have fully realized what happened, even if they know, or they maybe they're trying their best not to change a lot of things, they wouldn't confide in people perhaps because they didn't want things to change, because this is the most what, like the most that they can hold on to, at least out of all. One positive thing which I think we can all agree upon, that it is a positive thing, but maybe you guys could provide a little bit more insight on, and I say positive thing as in people are more aware of sexual assault after this one case, and I think we all know about the Nirbhaya case, right? And you know, they formed an organization and everything. So why do you think that that case, because there are so many, why do you think that that case shook India as a whole to be more aware, and how did it, like, you know, make people more aware?
Okay, so I think there was a lot of media attention given to
Yeah.
the Nirbhaya case, mostly because there were so many people who saw it happen and so many people who refused to shut up about it. Um, it was in a public setting, and it is also extremely gruesome, the fact that she had to go to the hospital, and within the hospital I think the doctors were also pretty shaken up, and the fact that they didn't want to keep quiet about it because after a certain point of time you've had enough.
Yeah.
They decided to speak about it, and then when she finally died, people who had been keeping track on her case, people who had witnessed it, people who'd heard about it, they refused to stop talking about it. So just by taking a stand against being quiet, against saying that these things happen, that had a huge impact on how the media and therefore the society views rape now. So those small things, the people who refuse to stay quiet about it, they have played such a huge role in making society what it is right now because of that one case.
I think it was just the collective impact of the entire incident, because it didn't just affect the family, but it affected a lot of people. And as Johanna said, it got a lot of media attention. And it's pretty stupid because of that. We got to know about it because every day there are so many cases, right?
Yeah.
But I think just as the media caught the attention and the details kept coming in, I think that triggered a lot of people. So that's what it took for a case to get so much limelight, and which is sad.
Okay, so we have been kind of talking about the after effects of mainly something which is, I think, the most extreme form of sexual assault is, of course, rape. But I wanted to get into a little bit more about the, I don't want to say not as severe, but rather the other forms, let's say the other forms of sexual assault. There was this video that circulated, I think, last year of a man with, and this is, you know, aside from general pedophilia, but I have put a trigger warning on this as I remember. But this man was basically touching this young girl, and he had said that and people caught him, like people caught him around. It was again in a public setting, he was doing it on the road, in fact, and a lot of people came and they, you know, were beating him up, trashing him up, whatever. And he had given the a very alarming statement, and the reason why I give this along with the touching is because both of those are forms of sexual assault. He had said that I was hungry, and very openly he had said that I was hungry. Now, you know, to a lot of people, they might have been like, objectively, if you read out that situation, sometimes you'd be like, was he, you know, he must have just tried to say whatever was. But just a statement like that, following an action like that, is triggering not only for, I think, just the girl in that situation, but the other women in that thing to maybe see something like that and witness that. And so I've basically covered three things, that three forms basically that I want to do. One is the triggering form, where you see something like that happening. What happens? Obviously, the you know, touching, not necessarily, you know, he might not have even been, as Ms. Gopica said about the interrogation, it might have just been touched. He might not even touched a person in an inappropriate place, but the way that he was, and of course statements. verbal harassment is something that is super important. So could you maybe perhaps shine a little bit more light on why these three things are not taken as intensely or severely as something like rape?
These three things are not taken as seriously because there's nothing visible to the naked eye. It doesn't trigger them that much. See, for example, and it's very basic. Like if a dog is killed on the street, it's something that happens, right? If a dead body is there. So, but if there's a human or if there's a bigger animal, it impacts you in
More.
a bigger way. So I think the repercussion of that act was not tangible for others. However, this doesn't mean that it negates or it takes away the pain or the trauma, but it doesn't affect human levels of apathy. It doesn't go into it. So that's the whole sad point, right? The basic empathy has been lowered down to a lot less level